so gaslit, which they are.
Are they? No, hang on, let me do a little audit of the heterosexuals. You mean the Lee Pace's character?
The people next door.
I don't think that's to do with them being heterosexual. I think that's to do with them being suburban. Right?
Okay.
You know, I think that's true. That's Christopher Isherwood as well, because he created that family in the book.
But he's living right next door.
I know, but he has to live amongst them, and I think he's basically that's Isherwood, and with a lot of help from Tom Ford, sticking it to the suburbs. And he subverts himself all the time, though. I mean, the Strunks are a pretty ghastly family, and I have to say, the Strunks. They're called the Strunks. This was Isherwood's name for the neighbors and the snotty kids, and the dad who does think that George is lighting the loafers and should be put in the Coliseum and all the rest of it. It's interesting about, we can consider ourselves progressive and enlightened when it comes to, the great march of liberation for marginalized groups of people. But, the scene in which I shot the phone call in which I get the news that Jim is dead, and that I also cannot come to the funeral because it's family only, happened to be also the day on which Prop 8 was passed in California. Mm-hmm. And suddenly you don't feel quite so lofty about, how far we've come. And we can't patronize the past, and we're actually it was just very resonant to me that we shot a scene like that in a moment when such a horrendously retrograde piece of legislation was passed. And on the way to work that day, because we were shooting mostly at night, in the afternoon, I was driven through those suburbs of Glendale or wherever it was, and there were families out in force, nice, waspy, perfect nuclear families that looked like, kind of, Horlicks commercials from the 1950s, and they, with ads up, placards up promoting Prop 8, smile and honk your horn for discrimination, and. So I don't think the film takes up a militant stance. I don't think it. In fact, I think it does the opposite. I think it does what Isherwood would have intended, which is it just makes it unassuming. It creates a world in which actually your sexuality belongs in the mainstream along with everyone else's. Even though I know what the background is, even though I know that George, he does the lecture on fear, I know it refers to that. But I don't think it's dependent on it.
You've said that Paul Scofield is one of your favorite actors. The chance to hold forth and really give a speech like that, did you?
No, that's not what I loved about Paul Scofield. It wasn't his King Lear or his Othello.
There's a voice similarity a little bit, I think.
Well, bless you for that. I mean, I'll take it. No, it was. I know I've been quoted on this. I've said it over and over again. Man for All Seasons. It was how little he did. It wasn't his oratory and his, the grandeur of his style. It was actually the fact that it was the first time I was about 12, 13, 14 years old. It was the first time I developed a new concept of what acting was, which was the idea that you can do everything without doing anything. And it was a paradox which gripped me at that age. And it's a paradox which exists in acting, and if you can probably expand that to just about every art form, because it's all artifice which seeks to create truth.
Did you know at that age that you wanted to be an actor?
That's when I wanted to become an actor, probably. To look at somebody and think, that I'm getting truth here. This is exuding truth. I'm feeling the quality of truthfulness, whatever that is, and it's a very nebulous commodity. But it's giving me at least a hankering for it, and to look at a face which it just conveyed truthfulness, and yet I knew this was a man who was engaged in an exercise which was by its very job description and nature artificial. He was acting, he was pretending. He wasn't really Thomas More. He didn't really live in the 16th century. He wasn't about to get his head cut off. He was just another thespian like me. You know, I was going to be. It just was, you know, showing up in front of a camera. So that gripped me. Until then, I had always admired demonstrative acting and, you know, the clever stuff. But here, I just saw something coming out of a guy's eyes. So little movement, and I thought, where does that come from?
Just this is an odd little thing, but there's a young blonde student, a girl, sitting there. And there are a couple of other women in the movie also who, number one, sort of remind us of movie stars of that period. She looks like a young Bardot, and your character looks them in the eye and is somehow very struck by their heavily made up eyes. And I wondered what that was about.
Well, Tom had a thing about eyes because I think it was to do with making. It was to do with connectivity. He has one day to live. You know, this is what he's decided. And there's a line that George has to Kenny at the end where he said the only thing that's made it all worthwhile have been the few moments when I've actually connected with another human being. And, you know, obviously it's, in the language of cinema, it's going to be about eyes, even though Tom tries to bring all the other senses in. And he does it beautifully, I think. But
they just seem very stylized, the women's.
Well, it might seem stylized, but I don't think the intention was to do with style. I think it was to do with, I mean, her eyes, she was, basically the model, as I understood it for her, was not Bud, it was Nico. Ah. And that, there's a, certainly, she has nothing if not a certain froideur, you know. And, you know, Kenny is the one who's reaching out and saying, I want to save you. All these eyes are basically, I think, calling George back to life again, having decided he's going to give up on it. These are eyes which are saying, you know, I'm reaching out, I would save you if I could. Whether it's the hustler outside the liquor store or the owner of the little dog that he meets. Mm-hmm. Her eyes are saying nothing. Mm-hmm. Her eyes are the cold eyes of, you know, indifference. I don't care what happens to you. And
blowing smoke.
Absolutely, the blowing of smoke. And that lecture hall is full of people who do not care one way or the other what George is talking about.
Isn't it sort of paradoxical that you played a guy who was close to the end of his life and deciding about that while getting into absolute perfect physical condition for the role?
Well, no, well, all right, yes, it is. And bless you for saying perfect physical condition. There's a lot to do with lighting and basically, I think that George tries to achieve perfection out of desperation. He puts on his cufflinks and his tie pin as if his life depended on them. I got the sense that this is a man, if you take away his tie pin, he will fall apart. It takes time in the morning to become George. You know, I put together the slightly stiff but perfectly, but utterly perfect George. That's body armor. That is not decoration. That is not vanity. That is a weapon against a terror of complete chaos, which I think is raging inside him. He is grief-stricken to an almost hysterical degree. He's woken up in the morning, among the first things you hear him say in the interior monologue is that it hurts to wake up. He does not like being in the present moment. Waking up begins with the words am and now. That's the way the novel starts. And inhabiting the present is intolerable. And that is why he has decided to kill himself. And in his world and in his perception, that is a perfectly rational decision to make. And what I think is magical about this story is that everything that happens to him is a challenge to that decision. The decision to give up on life, that he has passed judgment on life as not being worth living. And everything that happens challenges that.
Except for the people next door.
Well, except he meets the little girl from next door, who suddenly